What we expect is not always what we receive, and what we receive is not always what we need. The dust was dancing lazily in the midday sun when Jack Thompson heard the distant clatter of the wagon. His rough hands stopped working on the broken fence and rose to shield his eyes from the glare. By the age of 42, Jack had learned to read the sounds of the desert like other men read newspapers. That particular noise, the creaking of the wheels against the loose stones of the road, meant only one thing. Someone was coming towards him. His heart raced in a way that hadn't happened in months. Vivian would arrive today, the woman he had known only through carefully written letters, words that had warmed his lonely nights through the harsh winter. She had described herself as delicate, of medium height, with hair golden as ripe wheat. A teacher from the East who was looking for a fresh start away from the painful memories of a family lost to fever. Jack wiped his hands on his leather vest and walked to the porch of his modest home. The building was not large, but it had been erected with care. Each plank carefully chosen, each nail hammered with the hope that one day it would shelter more than just its loneliness. The small windows offered a view of the fields, where his few horses grazed quietly, and of the distant mountains that changed color as the day wore on. The wagon was slowly approaching, raising a cloud of red earth that mixed with the warm air. Jack could see the silhouette of the coachman, a thin man he knew from the city but couldn't make out the passenger. His hands sweated inside his pockets. He had rehearsed that moment dozens of times, imagining the right words to greet the woman who would become his wife. When the wagon finally stopped in front of the low fence that bounded his property, Jack walked down the wooden steps with measured steps. The coachman got off first, took off his hat and waved briefly. Then a figure moved inside the covered wagon. A hand appeared first, holding the side firmly. Then a foot shod with leather boots touched the stirrup. The woman who emerged from the cart looked nothing like the descriptions in the letters. Tall, almost Jack's height, she stood up with an upright posture that spoke of discipline and command. Her hair was brown, not golden, tied in a stern bun under a simple hat. He wore a dark, practical travel suit that did not disguise the strength evident in his broad shoulders. Vivian looked straight into Jack's eyes, not lowering her gaze as would be expected of a lady. There was something on her face, a hardness around her green eyes that suggested experiences very different from those of a teacher from the East. Small scars marked her hands, and the way she assessed the property with a single panoramic glance reminded one accustomed to unfamiliar terrain. Silence stretched between them as the coachman unloaded a battered leather suitcase and a small trunk. Jack removed his hat in an attempt to show courtesy, but the words he had prepared were lost somewhere between surprise and strange admiration. The woman before him carried with her a mystery that the letters had never revealed. Vivian took a step towards the fence, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. When he finally spoke, his voice had a firm quality without the soft tone he had imagined. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders, not receiving them. The hot wind blew between them, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. Jack realized that his life had just taken a completely different turn than he had planned. The woman before him was not the delicate wife he had expected, but perhaps she was exactly the partner he needed to face the harshness of this place, forgotten by everyone, but the relentless sun and the wind that never stopped blowing. The coachman departed, leaving only the echo of the wheels on the beaten earth, and two strangers measuring each other in the inclement sun. Jack watched Vivian examine the property with eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail. The distance to the road, the high points around the house, the possible escape routes. It was the look of someone who had learned to survive by evaluating unknown terrain. She carried her own luggage to the balcony, refusing Jack's help with a firm gesture of her hand. The small chest seemed too heavy for her size, but she lifted it with ease. His boots marked the wooden floor with sure steps, without hesitation. When he finally turned to face him, Jack saw something that surprised him, vulnerability hidden behind the rigid posture. The afternoon dragged on hot and heavy. Jack showed her the inside of the house, pointing to the room he had carefully prepared. He had bought new curtains in the city, a luxury his budget could barely afford. The mattress had recently been upholstered, and he had even placed wildflowers in a jar over the small dresser. Vivian watched everything in silence, only nodding as he finished each explanation. Over the simple dinner, bread, jerky, and strong coffee, she ate thriftily, chewing slowly, like someone who had known hunger and learned to cherish every mouthful. His hands held the utensils with military precision, cutting the flesh into uniform pieces. Jack tried to start conversations about the trip, about the weather, about the nearest city, but he received only short and polite answers. When night came, bringing the relief of the fresher air, they sat down on the porch. The stars appeared one by one in the clear sky, and the distant sound of coyotes echoed through the mountains. Jack had imagined this moment many times: intimate conversations under the starry sky, shared plans for the future, low laughter breaking the silence of the desert. Instead, Vivian remained alert, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the fence. From time to time, she would unconsciously touch something she was carrying under her shawl, a small, hard bump that Jack suspected was no ordinary female object. When a branch cracked in the wind, she turned quickly in the direction of the sound, and Jack saw his hand move instinctively to his hips. The tension between them grew like the heat of the day. Jack realized that there was more to Vivian's story than letters about teaching children in the East. The scars on her hands told different stories, and the way she evaluated every shadow, every movement, suggested experiences that a teacher would never have had. He also noticed other details: the precision with which she had folded her clothes, making them ready to be put on quickly; the strategic position he chose to sleep in, from where he could see both the door and the window; and most importantly, the way she never completely relaxed, as if she was always ready for some invisible threat. When they finally said goodbye to sleep, Jack lay down in his bed listening to the sounds of the night. He could hear Vivian moving in the next room, light but determined steps. She didn't seem to be getting ready for bed, but rather organizing, planning, maybe even saving something she didn't want him to see. The night wind shook the new curtains, and Jack looked up at the wooden ceiling, thinking about how complicated his life had become in a matter of hours. He had hoped for a gentle companion, someone who would bring softness to his rough existence. Instead, he had received a woman who carried secrets as he carried tools, with purpose and care. But there was something about Vivian's proud posture, the way she faced the unknown without fear, that aroused an unexpected admiration in Jack. Perhaps she was not the wife he had planned, but he was beginning to suspect that she might be just the partner he needed to face the challenges of this unforgiving land. Outside, a coyote howled alone in the dark vastness, and Jack wondered how many more secrets that night would reveal before dawn arrived with its own surprises. Dawn came, painting the sky orange and pink, but Jack had been awake for an hour, lying quietly as he listened to Vivian move around the house. She had risen before the sun, and by the sounds that reached him, she seemed to be cooking. The aroma of strong coffee and something that smelled of fresh cookies wafted through the morning air. When Jack finally got dressed and left the room, he found Vivian in the small kitchen, completely at ease. She had discovered where he kept the flour, the eggs of the chickens, and even the sugar he saved for special occasions. On the table, a full meal awaited: golden biscuits, eggs cooked to perfection, and slices of ham she had found in the pantry. Even more impressive was the way she had organized everything. Every utensil was clean and in its place, the leftovers stored properly, and there was not a crumb out of place. It was the efficiency of someone used to cooking for many people in difficult conditions, not the delicate work of a single teacher. During breakfast, Jack tried again to strike up a conversation. She asked about her family, about life in the East, about what had motivated her to respond to her ad in the newspaper. Vivian answered politely, but her answers were vague, as if she were reciting a memorized story. It spoke of a small school, of dear children, of a town that had become very sad after the loss of its parents. But his hands told a different story. Jack watched as she held the knife to cut the ham, not as someone who had learned to cook out of domestic necessity, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly where and how to cut. When one of the chickens ran through the open door, making a noise, Vivian turned around instantly, and for a moment Jack saw something in her eyes that looked like pure survival instinct. After breakfast, she insisted on helping with the farm chores. Jack tried to protest, saying that this job was too heavy for a lady, but Vivian was already walking towards the horses. She approached the animals without hesitation, reaching out for them to sniff before touching them. It was the behavior of someone who knew about horses, who knew how they thought and reacted. Jack's most stubborn horse, a chestnut Mustang who usually refused strangers, allowed Vivian to pet him without resistance. She examined their paws, checked their teeth, and even assessed their posture with obvious knowledge. When Jack commented on the animal's unusual docility, Vivian only smiled slightly and said that she had always had a way with horses. During the afternoon, while Jack was repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged by the wind, Vivian disappeared for nearly an hour. He searched the property for her and found her at the top of a small hill behind the house, watching the distant road with a small spyglass he had taken from his trunk. When she noticed Jack approaching, she quickly put the instrument away and walked down the hill with sure steps. The tension between them kept growing, fueled not only by what she was hiding, but by the unexpected attraction Jack felt for this mysterious woman. There was a strength in Vivian that fascinated him, an ability to face any situation without losing his composure. She was not delicate like the flowers he had placed in his room, but strong like the mountains that surrounded his estate. In the evening, while they were preparing dinner together, Jack decided to risk a more direct question. He commented that she seemed very knowledgeable for someone who had spent her life teaching children. Vivian stopped peeling potatoes for a moment, her fingers tensing around the small knife. She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to hold storms, and Jack had the impression that she was deciding whether she could trust him. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, and he realized that he was reaching a crucial moment. Anything she decided to reveal would change everything between them. The night wind began to blow through the cracks in the house, bringing with it the smell of distant rain and the feeling that bigger storms were approaching. Jack waited, knowing that forcing an answer would be the same as scaring away a wild animal that had finally begun to trust. The rain arrived overnight as an unexpected blessing, drumming on the wooden roof and filling the dry air with the scent of wet earth. Jack woke up to the sound and lay there for a moment, listening to the symphony of water against the windows. It was a rare sound in that region, almost musical in its irregularity. Then he heard another sound, footsteps on the porch. He stood up silently and peeked out the window. Vivian was standing under the eaves, wearing only a nightgown and shawl, watching the rain fall. There was something in her posture, a vulnerability that she had never shown during the day. Her shoulders were relaxed, and she reached out to feel the drops dripping from the roof. Jack put on his pants and went out to the balcony, stepping slowly so as not to scare her. Vivian heard him approaching, but didn't turn around. He continued to look at the curtain of water that transformed the dry landscape into a blurred and mysterious painting. For several minutes they stood there side by side without speaking. The rain created a natural intimacy, a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the rest of the world. That's when Vivian finally broke the silence, her low voice almost lost in the noise of the water. She began to tell her true story. I had not been a teacher. For 3 years, she had served undercover as a soldier in the war, using Victor's name to conceal her identity. He had learned to shoot, to ride, to survive in enemy territory. He had seen men die by his side. He had carried the wounded to safety. He had made decisions that cost lives and saved others. When the war ended, she was unable to return home. The delicate woman she had been before was no more. Her parents had indeed died, but not of fever. They had been executed for hiding supplies for the army where she served. Guilt consumed her, the feeling that her choice to fight had cost them their lives. Jack listened to it all without interrupting, feeling the weight of her words mingle with the weight of the rain in the air. She began to understand the scars on her hands, the way she scanned terrain, how she handled tools and horses. Every detail he had noticed in the last few days gained meaning, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. Vivian told how she had fled to the west, changing her name and inventing a new identity. He had responded to Jack's ad because he needed to disappear completely, to start a life where no one asked questions about his past. The correspondence had been his last disguise, the last lie before he tried to construct something true. But now, standing there in the rain, she could no longer lie. She looked at Jack for the first time since she had started talking, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I expected to see repulsion, disappointment, maybe even fear. A woman who had killed, who had lived as a man, who carried secrets as others carried baggage. Instead, Jack reached out and gently touched her face. Her rough farmer's hands met her skin wet from raindrops, and he saw something in her eyes that she might not have expected, understanding. He also carried scars. He had also done things during the war that he was not proud of. The rain continued to fall, washing away the dust accumulated from dry months, renewing the parched land. Jack realized that there was something symbolic in that moment, as if the storm was washing away the disguises between them as well, leaving only two people who had survived harsh worlds and found refuge in each other. Vivian leaned her face against Jack's hand, closing her eyes as if she were drinking in that unexpected kindness. For 3 years he had been hiding. He had pretended to be someone he was not. For the first time since the war had ended, he felt he could stop fleeing. The wind changed direction, bringing the rain closer to the balcony. They moved away into the house, but something fundamental had changed between them. The secrets had been revealed, and in place of the carefully constructed lie, something much more dangerous and precious had been born. The truth. Jack knew his life had changed forever on that rainy night. The woman next to him was not the submissive wife he had imagined, but perhaps she was just the brave companion he needed to weather whatever storm the future brought. 3 weeks after the night of the rain, life on the farm had found a new rhythm. Vivian no longer pretended to be delicate, and Jack no longer pretended not to notice her strength. They worked side by side as true partners, she mending fences with the same precision as he did, he respecting her views on horses and land management. The wedding had taken place in a simple ceremony in the city, with only the justice of the peace and 2 merchants as witnesses. Vivian had worn a simple but beautiful dress, and Jack her best suit. When they exchanged vows, the words spoke of companionship and mutual respect, not empty romantic promises. It was an agreement between equals, sealed with honesty rather than illusions. On the morning that would change everything, Jack was checking on the horses when he saw the dust on the road. 3 knights approached at a steady pace, and something in their posture made his stomach twitch. Vivian was in the backyard, hanging clothes on the clothesline, but when she heard the noise of the hooves, her hands stopped in the middle of the movement. Jack watched as she quickly assessed the situation. His eyes measured the distance up the house, up to the stable, up to the high points around the property. It was the same look he had noticed on the first day, but now he understood what it meant. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. The men stopped at the fence and slowly dismounted. The leader, a tall man with a grey moustache and a sheriff's star on his chest, politely took off his hat. But his eyes were not friendly, and the 2 men who accompanied him kept their hands close to the guns. Jack felt the tension grow like the midday heat. The sheriff asked for Victor Sullivan, describing a deserting soldier wanted for stealing military supplies during the war. Jack kept his face impassive as he listened, but noticed how Vivian kept spreading her clothes, seemingly unconcerned. Only he noticed how his movements became more deliberate, more calculated. When the sheriff finished his description, Jack replied, that he didn't know any Victor Sullivan. Vivian then approached, drying her hands on her apron, the perfect portrait of a farmer's wife, curious about unexpected visitors. She greeted the men courteously, offered fresh water, asked about the trip. But Jack saw something in the sheriff's eyes change when he looked at Vivian. A suspicion, a partial recognition perhaps. The man studied his face for a very long moment, and Jack felt the danger grow like a storm gathering on the clear horizon. That's when Vivian did something that surprised everyone. Instead of retreating or hiding, she stepped forward and looked straight into the sheriff's eyes. He said that he had heard of this Victor Sullivan, who was known as a deserter, but also as a hero by many soldiers. That perhaps the crimes he had committed were less important than the lives he had saved. The sheriff furrowed his brows, clearly not expecting an open defense of a wanted fugitive. Vivian continued, her voice firm but respectful, talking about how the war had changed many people, how some men had made difficult choices to protect their comrades, how maybe it was time to let the past rest in peace. Jack observed the internal conflict on the sheriff's face. It was obvious that the man was suspicious of Vivian's true identity, but it was also clear that his words had touched something in him. Perhaps he himself had served in the war, had seen the confusion and impossible decisions she had described. After a tense silence, the sheriff put the hat back on his head. He said that he would continue to look for Victor Sullivan, but that perhaps the man he was looking for had already paid the price for his mistakes in other ways. He mounted his horse and set off with the two men, leaving only dust and relief in the hot air. As the riders disappeared onto the road, Vivian finally relaxed her shoulders. Jack approached her, and without words, they embraced there in the backyard, under the sun that had witnessed so many meetings and goodbyes in that old land. That night, sitting on the porch under the familiar stars, Jack realized that he had found more than one wife. He had found a true partner, someone who would face any storm by his side. Vivian was not the delicate woman he had expected, but she was exactly the brave companion he needed. The past would remain part of who she was, but the future belonged to both of them. In the vastness of the desert, under the endless sky that covered secrets and dreams alike, two lonely hearts had found a home in each other, and that, Jack knew, was worth more than all the comfortable lies in the world. If this story of courage and survival has touched your heart, you can't miss our upcoming adventures in the American Wild West. Subscribe to the channel to follow more narratives about brave souls who found hope in the barren lands of the desert, where the past meets the future, and where two lonely hearts can discover that true love is born of honesty and mutual respect.